Good morning, everyone. This is Andre with the Impulsive Thinker podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by CADAC, the Center of ADHD Awareness Canada, Canada's ADHD charity. This morning, I have a far away guest and a special guest because I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Name is Femke Hovinga from the Netherlands. She is a social entrepreneur and researcher. She works in the field of gifted with a special focus on 145 plus IQ and designs psychometric instruments focused on the gifted group. Good morning, Femke. Good morning, Femke. How are you this morning?
Hi, Andre. I'm very happy to be here, and goedemorgen to you as well. I'm glad to hear you're polishing up your Dutch skills.
Good morning. Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, it's a hard.
I'm French, so it's a little easier than most.
Yeah, I suppose so. Most people would describe it as a choking sound in a word. So,
yeah.
Happy to be here.
Good morning, like a choking sound.
Yeah, like
good.
that. Yeah. No, that's a bit aggressive. No.
We haven't met till this morning officially.
Yeah.
But what I heard you speak at a conference called Let's Talk to E, which is Twice Exceptional. And Twice Exceptional is you're identified gifted with a learning disability. So either ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and there's a list. And that was put on by Julie Skolnick. And you really talked about the topic you talked about just hit me huge. Why did I bring on a gifted expert? Because personally, I think all the high achieving ADHD entrepreneurs that I know, and I know who are listening, they have a high level intelligence. If not more, the majority are gifted. So I think this is very relatable. And we're going to get into that. But first, I'd like you say you're a social entrepreneur.
Yes.
Please explain that.
What I mean with that is that I am an entrepreneur. So I'm managing an organization. I'm running that day to day, but the focus of the organizations is social. So we're really focusing on what we can do to contribute to a better world, and specifically focused on the gifted and 2E group in this case.
Oh, having that definition, I guess I am a social entrepreneur too.
Yeah, well, that sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds really good. I learned something today. Thank you, Femke. What I wanted to talk to you about is, and I wanted to share with the listeners here, because it was very profound for me, and I actually listened to your presentation twice. And that's rare for me. You said Boreout or burnout, and Boreout is BORE as in bored. And that really hit me because I think I've quite a few examples, but can you explain those two things?
Yes, absolutely. So as you mentioned, burnout is the term we often use, and what you hear when people may be at home for a while sick, burnout. But recently we started talking more about boreout, indeed like being bored, but it's pretty much the exaggerated version of being bored because you're over your boredom when you're bored out. And the burnout process is basically an exhaustion process. So you spiral into feeling less and less good in your situation. There's different types of burnout, but typically we talk about the burnout that derives from work situations. And now we're talking about ADHD entrepreneurs, of course. So we're focusing here on what happens on the work floor. And what we saw happening is that it's not only burnout, so you're not only suffering from too high job demands, as we call them, but you can also get bored out because, for instance, being a highly intelligent or even gifted person, you don't get to do the things you want to do or the things you can do because you're either too young, you don't fit in the profile they see, you don't have the gray hairs yet. For whatever reason, you cannot really use your talent within the organization. So for instance, what happened to me several years ago, before I worked in the field of gifted, I was a project manager at an organization that did mostly events. And I had a really great colleague whom I shared a room with. And I was in my early 20s. And every weekend I went out partying and I had great times. And I was like, woohoo! And Monday morning, I came into the office pretty much hungover still because I had such a great weekend.
All the
And I come
memories.
to my office. Oh yeah. I'd come into my office and be like, hey, how was your weekend? And he'd be like, oh man, I had to do so much work. I had to keep up with everything. And oh, it was really tough. But I'm here again and I'm sort of energized because I got some sleep. And I was like, whoa, we have the exact same job. What am I doing wrong? So I was doing my work in about maybe 12 hours a week, which was a full-time job. And he, my colleague, was working on it the whole week. So I started to really doubt myself. Like, am I missing something? I mean, I was hitting my targets. I was doing well, was having a relatively good time. Other than that, I was in continuous doubt because, if I do this and it's that easy, how do I get through the week? And that led into, well, I quit in time. Despite the fact that it was a great organization, I didn't get enough challenges there. So I went to the CEO there and I asked him, is there anything else I can do for the company? Like, can I think about the strategy or the finance, or is there anything I can do which is basically above my pay grade, but what I can do to contribute because I have time left in my work week? And he went like, yeah, no, you're just doing your work. You're doing good. Keep it going. And I was like, okay, I spent like 3 days a week at the pool or reading books or doing other things. And it just didn't feel good. So I got really bored, despite the fact that others were just fine in their positions. And to say that everybody, of course, responds differently to any situation. So burnout is a sort of syndrome, as they call it, of emotional exhaustion, emotional distancing oftentimes, depersonalization, and competentions that get less over time. So you sort of start performing less, liking it less. Oftentimes people get really cynical about things, like going to your work. Yeah, it will be another great day because, everybody sucks at work. And, you focus on all the negative. And it's pretty much the same with Boreout, except for the fact that burnout is when you get overstimulated. So you have to do more and more and more and more. So my office mate, for instance, will probably be prone to burnout, whereas I was very prone to Boreout at the time. So it's a similar situation, but with a different trigger.
So burnout is being overstimulated. So would
Yeah.
you say that bore out is being understimulated?
Yes, it is in a way. But it's not so that ADHD or gifted people or people who are both gifted and have ADHD cannot get a burnout, because also what we see oftentimes is perfectionism. So if you want to do things really well all the time and you feel like an imposter, I did feel like an imposter at the time. We call that imposter syndrome. So the fear you'll get caught in the fact that you're actually not doing great, but you are just doing something and they'll figure out that you're not actually as good as you think you are. So if you're continuously trying to overperform and you're already putting a lot of energy and effort and perhaps even worry into your work, then you can still get burned out, even though you may be very talented and gifted. So it's a bit of a thin line between burnout and bore-out. And what makes it even harder is that there is not such a thing as a diagnostical manual for it. So where we have ADHD, for instance, in the DSM, which is sort of the Bible of the psychologist, that I'll look into that and see whether you sort of fit a profile. There is no such thing for burnout or bore-out. There are a few lists of characteristics and there are a few like tests psychologists use, but it's overlapping with quite a few other things, such as depression, such as just feeling bored. So it's really hard to find out where you are at.
So the trying to overperform here, that really stuck out to me for Boreout. Is that so? In using your example, that be you did 12 hours work, took you to do 40 hours worth of work in 12.
Yeah.
Is that trying to overperform mean to fill that gap?
Yes.
Okay.
So what happened to me, but of course there are many examples besides my own. What happened to me is that I worked about 12 hours, perhaps spread over 3 or 4 days. And the rest of the time, I felt I should be working because, it's my work day, it's during
Yeah.
work hours, but I'm not working because I don't really have anything to do.
Hmm.
I started procrastinating because, the few things I really had to do, they could wait because others were doing them, later in the week. And the procrastination basically built up into a really ineffective place where I started feeling really unhappy because every working hour I wasn't working, I felt like I would be caught, or I was, not performing well enough. Whereas
Hmm.
this specific organization was an organization in which you just had to get your goals, your targets, a commercial organization. I got my targets, so I guess it was fine, but it didn't feel fine to me at all.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because even as an entrepreneur, like in my days before I realized unemployable, like I
Mhm.
was in a work term for university and I was actually told to slow down,
Yeah,
right? I wanted to be there to learn, but they're saying I was working too fast and did not
yeah,
realize at the time of my like my labels as you call it. But um I'm seeing that even now as an entrepreneur, I'm leading an engineering organization and I'm staying at the high level. I've got staff to do my engineers, my drafters, my admin to do all this stuff. And even though I'm doing a project, I do it very quickly and I'm all looking around going, what else am I going to do? And
yeah,
so it's now I'm overperforming just to put in a full day's work. So it looks like I'm doing something, but I've already done, like I was talking to this, my engineering manager who's now my partner. And he goes, the reports you wrote, one day I went to site, looked at a project, wrote a report. They're able to go back to site. And he looked at me, he says, that had been a 2-day report for him. And I did it in under 6 hours.
yeah,
And then so you say, okay, and he's accepted, he's okay with that, and basically told me to go home. But I'm like, I still have technically a day and a half's worth of stuff to look
yes,
busy. So I
exactly.
think, I guess the takeaway that for the listener on that one is even as the entrepreneur, you own the organization. You may have a tendency to try to outperform or overperform so you look like you're busy to the others. Is that a fair
Huh?
assessment?
Well, yeah, I think that's what we hear often, at least. I mean, there's very little research about this
Hmm.
in terms of being a gifted or talented employee, perhaps even 2E, so with ADHD or ASD or dyscalculia or whatever, as you mentioned. So we know very little from research, but we do know a lot from practice. And we get
Yeah.
many adults here with similar stories. So I guess it's fair to say that not many listeners will recognize this. And even if you're not gifted or perhaps not know you're gifted yet, which we also often hear about the generation above like 25, 30 years old,
Yeah.
that we only find out now that perhaps something is going on there. So even if you're just, to put it like that, ADHD, then you still have many of those talents. So you can
Hmm.
see many different things quickly. You have a hyper focus in some cases. You have the talent to improvise. There are many talents that are actually quite similar and overlapping, which may, become less of a talent in certain situations where you want to use your ADHD skills,
Hmm.
but you're actually put into another box, basically. And what I would really like to see, and what's happening more and more, fortunately, is a focus on neurodiversity within the
Yes.
organization.
Yeah.
So people are starting to warm up to that. Even bigger multinationals are doing like neurodiversity committees,
Hmm.
focusing on the good in whatever diagnosis, as they put it, there is. And I really like that. So I hope we can all look at our individual talents, and also for organizations and even for society. I just wish we can look at what people can bring instead of what box they don't fit into. So for me, that
Yeah.
was when I actually graduated my master's. Here in the Netherlands, we have a differentiated level of high school. So you go to the vocational level, like the middle level, and the higher level is sort of the university level.
Hmm.
Well, even though I am gifted and therefore I have the cognitive talent to go to the highest level, I struggled my way through school. I didn't go well at all. I wasn't seen. So I went down to the lower levels. And afterwards, I went through the University of Applied Sciences and I worked my way up to a master's degree. So I graduated and went on a conversation and a job interview basically with an HR director. And she just said, "Oh, let me look at your resume." So I'm like, "Okay, sure. Well, here's my resume." And she's like, "Yeah, you went to the lower level high school." And she looked like, ugh, the lower level high school. I'm like, "Yeah, that's right. But I also, graduated my master's and I have some experience. And well, I bring something to the table at least." And she goes like, "Yeah, but with the lower level high school, you can be the assistant to our real consultants. Perhaps you can make their PowerPoint presentations." And I was just like gobsmacked, like, "What
Yeah.
are you saying? You're not
Yeah.
looking at an individual, but you're just looking at their papers, in this case, my papers." But we often hear stories like these, and that's pretty shocking. So
Yeah,
I
that's judgment. Someone's making a judgment based on something.
absolutely, yeah.
And then what you were saying a bit earlier, and I agree, like it would be nice that people can see someone and say, "Hey, you don't act like me." Instead
Mhm.
of being judgmental about it, is to look at it and understand why.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Why do you behave that way? Oh, it could be autism, could be ADHD. It could be the fact that you're a narcissist. It could, I think if we
Mhm.
take away that judgment filter and
Yeah.
understand the people, I agree. It would be a much better place and more accepting and understanding. And I think that we don't have that. Just like that
Yes.
person, you went to a low level school, you just don't understand that you went and achieved a high academic achievement with masters. And I got to tell
Yeah.
you, that's good because there's no way else having any patients going through masters.
Mhm. Well, it was a hard track. That's what yeah.
The other thing you said in your presentation at the 2E conference was why was that gifted people, and I'm going to put the ADHD entrepreneur in here too.
Mhm.
High work pressure gives them more pleasure,
Yeah.
while the neurodivergent brings them less pleasure. That
Yeah.
really interests me, and I can I know it makes sense, but I need more explanation for you.
Yeah, sure. So what we recently did is research here in the Netherlands. So I'm not sure whether it will apply to whatever country you're listening into from, but here in the Netherlands, we found that under a group of gifted working adults, that work pressure wasn't a high job demand. So we're working with the model that's called the job demands and resources model. So you can Google that, or perhaps Andre, you can put it in the show notes so that people can have a look at it. And that shows what gives you the energy to do your work and what are the demands that may lead into exhaustion. And the work pressure for most people, like for the general population, is an exhaustion thing. So the higher the work pressure, the worse your work situation will generally get. It may take a while, but generally it's not a very good thing. For the gifted people, though, it didn't lead to burnout issues more often. So we found that in them, low work pressure was actually a worse thing to have than high work pressure. And in general, I can emphasize with that, especially if you look at the example I gave earlier about my job in a commercial organization, then I was not really happy there. And it wasn't because my work pressure was too high or whether my work peers weren't fun, because there were many things were just in place, but the work pressure was way too low for me.
Mhm.
And that's what we found in those other people too, that they'd rather be, um, excited, working all the time, perhaps even a bit too busy some days. But as you may recognize from ADHD and giftedness, you get bored quite quickly.
Oh yeah.
So if I were to do a similar job for years, I'd be very unhappy. I really would not appreciate it. And there are some people who definitely would, because it's in their comfort zone. They're fine with it. They're enjoying working with the same people for a prolonged time. And that's fine too. But if you're, prone to being bored in the beginning. So for me, the excitement of something new only lasts for a couple of months. And I'm like, I know this trick now.
Yeah.
I want to move on. So it's very funny because we have this metaphor here, which goes something like people would call me the how do you call somebody who wants to make fire all the time? I don't know the word.
An arsonist.
Yes, exactly. And the rest of the people here are like the firemen. So I'll go and put another fire somewhere with another idea, and they start running and go like, no, Femke, not again. We just got used to the idea we had before. And that's what happens here now. And oftentimes, fortunately, I have great colleagues, and oftentimes, of course, we'll be just fine and we'll figure it out and we'll find a way. And sometimes they tell me, no, you have to stop it now. And I'll do that then.
It's like my coach tells, like my business coach tells us too, is like, if you got a bunch of fires around you, you can't find the arsonist, look in the mirror.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Yes. That's
so,
a good metaphor.
Like I relate to that so much, because I go back to when I started my first engineering company. I thrived. I had no money. I don't, if I didn't succeed, we're going to be in financial peril. There's a lot of pressure on me. I was doing a lot of fun work. I was learning new stuff. It was interesting. And that was high pressure. And I thrived and I loved it. And while everyone was looking at me going, you should be dead.
Yeah.
Right? Then my company got successful. I started having a team, and then started to level out, and that work pressure diminished.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to, now I'm looking back, and I think I got bored. Oh, I know I got bored. Then I started to create a lot of fires so I can have that high pressure going. And I think what happened is I got bored out. And from that, created a lot of anxiety, pressures. And then I ended up getting burned out. So that's why it really related to me, this Boreout versus burnout. And now I use that as an early indicator. If I'm starting to wanting to start fires, I'm bored. Yes. Stop, check it out. And then to me, it was an early warning. It's an early warning sign to causing more problems, but to be aware of that, being bored is a problem. And we're more susceptible to be bored than burnt out. Although it's a very big message that we need to get to our listeners for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel personally that having all these fires doesn't need to be a bad thing, as long as it's in the right place. So we can have a fire inside our house to stay warm. That's fine. And a fire in your kitchen is perhaps a bit less of a good idea. So it really depends on where you're at, whether it's good, because it's also a great talent in ADHD and gifted people to even, be aware of where you could possibly start a fire. Many people wouldn't even see the wood. So I'd be excited for people to start fires here and there, but be aware of that as a signal to identify you may get bored. But also, we have a client of ours is a ADHD entrepreneur, and he basically creates his own problems to then solve them. And that's sort of, he doesn't do it on purpose. But every time something goes wrong in his companies, when he gets bored, and he'll sort of create a problem, then solve it, and then move on. And under that high pressure, I tend to think that people, ADHD and gifted people, function really well under high pressure. And for me, that also prevents me from procrastinating. Prevents me from doing all these things like online shopping, petting my dog all day, doing laundry during the workday.
It's got to be a healthy level of pressure.
Exactly. It's all about balance, I guess.
And then, putting a fire under someone's ass to get going is one thing versus setting fire to a project is another.
Yes, exactly.
and I find a lot of those fires, if it's not initiated by emotional dysregulation, you're right. It is. Those are the good things for us. But once the emotional dysregulation controls me or takes care of it, that's when the fires become forced fires. And then it's way too late, and we lose customers, we lose staff, we lose relationships, and it's definitely not. But I like your analogy. It is true. A fire in the home for heat versus burning the whole house down, completely two different things.
Yeah.
Where can people find you, Femke?
So I think it's easiest for those listening to reach out to me through LinkedIn, which is, my name is probably a bit hard for most people, but it's Femke Hovinga. So that's Hovinga. I'm sure you don't know many Femke Hovinga's, although there is one in Canada. There are not.
Okay. Can you tell us? Yeah, go ahead.
You can perhaps find the Canadian woman, but you can also find me because the websites of our organizations are in Dutch. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions through LinkedIn. That's the easiest way.
And I'll put that link in the show notes. Can you tell me about your organizations that you are running?
Absolutely. So we have Talentissimo, which is an organization that focuses on gifted 2E and especially the 145 plus IQ children and adults. So we go into schools, for instance, to help them develop programs for these children, but we also coach parents in how to raise a, well, pretty complicated, lots of fun, but pretty complicated kids sometimes. That's the first organization, and the second is Scalic, and that's an organization in which we develop those materials you just mentioned earlier. So we recently launched a new IQ test to, well, which is basically, as we say, it gifted and 2E proof. So we really want to do justice to their way of thinking, and we want to just measure what their potential is. And we have quite a few other tools, especially developed for the gifted and 2E group. So that's what we're doing, all in gifted. And I'm doing my own research at the university here, Nijrode Business University. So from the perspective of HR, and then working on talent and giftedness in the organization.
Well, fantastic. Well, I'm glad you're on this path because we definitely need that for better understanding of everyone. So I want to thank you for your work. I want to thank you for taking the time, for taking a random email invite. I do appreciate that.
My pleasure. I love random email invites.
I love this conversation, and this topic really hit me. So I'm really fortunate we got to share that with our listeners. And what I would ask the listeners right now is, do you burn out or do you bore out? I need you to really understand the two differences and take a look back in your entrepreneur journey, even in the time when you were unemployable and you had a job. Were you more bored than burnt out? And did that cause problems in your job or in your companies? And then how can we use that as an early warning? I'd love to hear from you about that. You can send it to me at questions@theimpulsivethinker.com. Femke, thanks again. Good morgen.
Een fijne dag gewenst.
Okay.
That means have a great day.
Oh, I will now.
Thank you so much for your good work and for having me here with you today.
Well, I appreciate that, and take care. And to the listeners, the Center of ADHD Awareness Canada is starting up a couple support programs that they would love to provide that at a low fee. So if you can go to kadak.ca/donate, $5 would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Femke, and thank you to the listeners, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.